Just like cars, software engineering projects also consist of different components. To develop each component of software, developers need to use an architectural pattern. One architectural pattern that we can use is model view controller pattern. In this presentation, I will give a brief introduction on MVC pattern and talk about each design pattern. So the purpose of the model view controller pattern is that it makes the web-based software development easier by dividing each component into categories. MVC pattern divides software into three categories. Model is where the data is and what type of data should be handled. View is responsible for providing the user with an interface to display the data. Controller contains functions to handle user input and manipulate the data in the model. We will start with model pattern, but I will talk about the project Detroit over the presentation. It was an application to split payments and calculate expenses among groups. And I use three different technologies for three different components. For model, I used Entity Framework Core, which then transforms C# data into an SQL database. I use C# for the controller part, which interacts with the EF Core technology. And for model, for view, I use Blazor server, which has the mod Blazor components, which consists of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let me start with model first. As it named, model is the fundamental structure of the data that needs to be contained in software. Model also instructs what type of data that needs to be contained. If the type of data is not indicated in the model, then it will not contain that type of data. For instance, if phone is entered as an integer, then it will not accept a string as an input. Additionally, there might be more than one model for each for an application. For instance, a bank application can have client, company, lender, agency, and bank models. As model is the fundamental structure of MVC pattern, controller provides functions to manipulate data in model. So in Project Detroit, uh, I created 7 models, but one of them is not functional because a shared model was unnecessary. So also my models not only included the entities, but it also included foreign keys, primary keys, and the list of intersections. Those models that are associated with the app.db context, which handles the relationship among the models, which can be one-to-one, many-to-many. Then later, as as .NET developers, we run migrations to create database. So yeah, I'm going to talk about controller pattern next. Controller contains functions to manipulate data in model. Each function performs different tasks in model, and it might contain various functions. For instance, client controller can contain add client, edit client, remove client, view client by ID, add balance, decrease balance functions. A software can contain more than one controller. For instance, as there are uh, uh, client, company, lender, agency, and bank models, there must be client controller, company controller, lender controller, agency controller, and bank controller classes related to those models. So let me also explain about how I implemented the controller pattern. Again, I implemented 7 controllers for 7 models. However, one of them was dysfunctional, so there was only 6 controllers. And in each controller is implemented from the app.db context, which is based on Entity Framework Core, which provides the functions relevant to the Entity Framework Core technology. and it works like it works like as similar as other object oriented programming languages, and it also gets parameters from views and then does the actual work at the backend, and then it interacts with the model, and then it performs changes in the model. An example of a function can be and get payments based on user ID, get payments based on group ID. Those are related to the payment service, but there are different services. So there are different functions for different services. Let me talk about the um view component. Not all users are able to develop programs to interact with the model. Therefore, developers have to write views to let user interact with the controller and model. In graphical user interface-based programs, view is typically written as web pages, window boxes, or XML models. One view can contain several controllers. For instance, edit client can call functions in client controller, company controller, and bank controller. Views can also be written as components which can be triggered in another view. Yeah, this is how the view works. But I'm also going to talk about how I implemented the views. First of all, I use the Blazor server for view part, and it was based on mod Blazor, which is a template written for Blazor, and it consists of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Basically, it handles all the front end part of the application, and as you can see, it is very similar to HTML, CSS. And there's also the coding section. This coding section actually helps Vue to interact with the model. And there are also other pages or views as well, but those views are generic views generated by the ASP.NET. So that's it about what I know about the MVC pattern. But I would also like to introduce about the uh, class diagrams that we made for this application. So it is very similar. There are the CRUD operations there in that UML diagram. There are also the support info. There is also the user profile, which can be derived into premium profile and standard profile. However, we did not use those UML diagrams because the implementation process was different than the design process. So let me conclude the presentation. And if we cannot assemble a car without certain design patterns, then we cannot develop a design pattern without using software architectural patterns. So thank you for listening my presentation. There is also the source code is also available in my GitHub, and I used when I was making that presentation, I mostly used references from CIS 376, and I used some of the schemas from the websites listed below. So thank you for listening my presentation, and yeah, that's it.